Good morning, everybody. Now that our leader has arrived, I think we can commence our proceedings. Well, the Italian elections were held on March 4th, and we're still waiting to learn the outcome. I think our students know this much. This long period of negotiations, these protracted discussions, this wait for who is going to be the prime minister and what is the composition of the government, may be difficult for American students to understand on first exposure to Italy, because elections in the United States the outcome is determined the night or the next morning after the election. I am by no means arguing that the American system is better. It's certainly more secure. I think I would be hard-pressed to say it's better given the most recent outcome. But fortunately today we have gathered a group of experts to help us understand this process and the prospects for the future. We have convened groups of American experts after the American elections since 2014, since the first election of Barack Obama, usually a week after the American elections. And we have modeled this convening on that. And it has proven a very successful way of having experts speak among themselves, actually, in a public context, exposing students, both Italian and American, to the deepest level of analysis of American politics that they could get with a group of people to whom they would have no general access in the United States. So we're excited that we are replicating this, not for the first time, for the second time, with respect to the Italian elections. So first and foremost to our fearless leader, Roberto Andalumonte, who conceived of this idea. Thank you for organizing this, and his two wonderful colleagues, all members of our faculty, Alessandro Chiaramonte and Niccolo Conti, who unfortunately cannot be with us actually today for personal family reasons, but we thank him sincerely for helping to organize this. And with that, I leave it to you to inform us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you for having promoted, having supported this conference and hosting this conference. I would like also to thank all the people from the staff who have contributed to the organization of this conference, and finally I would like to thank you, all of you, for being here. I'm replacing Niccolo Conti, who should have chaired this session of the conference devoted to the electoral campaign, what happened before the vote. As Ellen said, he cannot be with us for personal reasons. The first session deals with the electoral campaign mainly. We will have three presentations from Donatella Campus. She's a professor from the University of Bologna. Lorenzo De Sio, who is professor in the Lewis University in Rome, and Professor Filippo Tronconi from the University of Bologna. So I think we are ready to start, and Donatella Campus will make a presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this invitation. I'm really very glad to be here in this marvelous place, and so really thank you. The title of my presentation is Campaign Strategies in the 2018 Italian General Election. And as a general premise, let me start by saying that I'm not presenting you an original research or original data. What I'm going to do is just to offer you some reflections, basically my own impressions about this campaign. Of course, I will try to support my statements with some empirical evidence that was made available by several research institutes during the campaign and immediately after the campaign, and with the help, of course, of some analytical concept. But as I said, those are just my reflections, so I'm aware that maybe not everybody could agree with me among my colleagues, but I think this could be also the opportunity for opening the discussion and for comparing our viewpoints, I think. So I will try also to leave some time at the end for the discussion, 10 minutes more or less?
Yeah.
Okay.
We will have a presentation of about 20 minutes from each of our speakers, and then some more time, 10 minutes for questions and answers.
I will talk to you about the first 4 political actors in terms of share of votes. I decided to concentrate my presentation because of the time constraints, and so I will talk to you about the five-star movement, the Partito Democratico, the Northern League, and Forza Italia. But before entering the details directly concerning the campaign, let me talk to you about 2 notions, 2 analytical concepts, actually 2 distinctions that will be useful to interpret this, the campaign strategy of each political actor. The first distinction is between conquest campaign and maintenance campaign. This is a well-known distinction to scholars of marketing, and in particular of political marketing. This means that if you carry out a conquest campaign, your intention is that of expanding your electorate, outside the traditional base of voters. By contrast, if you are carrying out a maintenance campaign, this means that you want to maintain your traditional voters. And this is the first one. The second is a distinction between what I called a retrospective approach and a prospective approach. Here I'm borrowing the terminology from models of voting. Scholars of voting know very well that there are 2 possible ways of interpreting voting. Voters could be supposed to reason in terms of performances, so they evaluate performances and they decide in terms of rewards and punishments, or they could be supposed to reason in terms of electoral promises, so to evaluate the potential of parties and candidates. So if you look at the same concept from the point of view of the campaign strategist, this means that a party or a candidate can appeal make a retrospective appeal or make a prospective appeal. So by keeping in mind those 2 distinctions, I'm sorry, I'm a bit, maybe I'm too rapid, but I don't have so much time, but by keeping in mind those 2 distinctions, what I'm going to do is to analyze the campaign strategy of the 4 political actors I mentioned before, and I organize my presentation by following the line adopted by most political observers and media the day after the election. I know that it is a sort of simplistic reading to divide the group into pairs, the winners and the losers, but I think in any case it's also a revealing distinction, because also from the point of view of the campaign strategy, there are some points in common between the 2, so between the 2 winners and between the 2 losers. So let us analyze the winners before, five-star movement and Northern League. The common elements, I think that both parties carried out a sort of conquest campaign. This is quite clear from the point of view of the Northern League. This is a medium-long-term strategy, because Salvini has been transforming the League from a local party to a national party. And the best symbol of this is the change in the party logo. This is the old Northern League logo. You may see quite clear the use of the adjective Northern, and also the reference to Padania, that is a sort of ideal fatherland for the Northern League. It's not really an existent territory, but it's sort of ideal territory in the north. Now, this is the new logo. No more the adjective Northern, and Padania has been replaced. And there is the name of the party leader, that is, by the way, Matteo Salvini. I think we don't have any perplexity about the style of campaign of the Northern League. As for the Five Star Movement, actually, I leave my colleague Filippo Tronconi, who will talk about the Five Star Movement in details, but I think that by definition, the Five Star Movement cannot carry out a maintenance campaign because the electorate is very fluid. So at the end, I think that both can be considered as party which carried out a conquest campaign. And also both adopted a prospective approach, and this was taken for granted because the Five Star Movement never governed before. But the Northern League governed in the past, but it was far away, it was another league. Salvini changed the outlook of the party, and in any case, they were both strongly anti-establishment. This means that Salvini as well, so both said, okay, we are different, we don't belong to the ruling elites. So in any case, this was a prospective approach in the sense projected into the future with what I called a sort of strong anti-establishment narrative. And personally, I think this was one of the winning cards for both parties. Third point that they have in common is the fact that the common opinion is that both leaders were really leading actors on the internet. And this is a common opinion. I'm not really an expert. I'm a scholar of political communication, but I'm not really an expert on social media, but I tried to find some data that could support this statement, that could support this common opinion. Let me just show you very rapidly a couple of data. This is from a blog, Social Recap, and it is the number of fans increase on Facebook. And you may see that Salvini and Di Maio are the two leaders that during the campaign increased more than the other the number of fans. This is one thing. There are really many data. I decided to take just a couple of things because of the time constraints, just to give you an idea. Another data, and this is from Blogmeter, that is a company, one of the main companies in Italy that collects and analyzes social media. According to this data, you may see that Salvini is the first and Di Maio is the second in terms of interactions generated by their initiatives on 4 social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, while Matteo Renzi is just the 4th one. And this is interesting because also Renzi in the past was considered very good from that point of view. And so the fact that he has been bypassed by the other two is an interesting, I think, point. Okay, let me come back. Just to say that 3 points in common, but 1 point really different. I think it concerns the notion of leadership. Because the Northern League, from that point of view, has a traditional view of leadership in terms of a great centrality on the leader. And Matteo Salvini was really the leading actor, the spokesperson for the Northern League. This is not entirely true for the Northern League, because the Northern League has something that, in my view, is more similar to a sort of distributed leadership. So Di Maio is the party leader, is the electoral leader. However, also other people speak for the party. And let me show you some data from the Osservatorio di Pavia that are revealing, I think. The Osservatorio di Pavia is a research institute that measure time on television. Those data refer just to the public television, so they are partial but meaningful, I think. The last row is the Partito Democratico, and the Five Star Movement is immediately above. Compare the Five Star Movement with the Northern League. I don't know if I have the way. Can you read it? Can you see it? you may see the difference between the League and the Five-Star Movement, because the blue color is referred to the leader, and the other color are referred to other people in the party, so local administrator, representative in parliaments, and so on. So it is very interesting, I think, to show the difference from that point of view between the four main parties, because in the Northern League, Salvini is more visible, even than, in proportion, of course, even more than Berlusconi in Forza Italia. Let us analyze the loser now, the two losers, the Partito Democratico and Forza Italia. And even in this case, I think there are some points in common, for two reasons. Conquest or maintenance campaign. As for the Partito Democratico, I should say that I'm stretching a bit the concept, in the sense that, to be honest, I didn't catch exactly what was the strategy of the Partito Democratico. Exactly, I didn't catch the proper target of voters of Partito Democratico. I tend to think that the Partito Democratico didn't have a clear idea in mind from this point of view. Probably it hoped to maintain the previous electorate, but honestly, I'm accepting suggestion also from my colleagues, because it's not completely clear, but in any case, I think it was not a conquest campaign. According to Berlusconi tried actually to reconquer his own electorate. This is my view. And this is also the reason why I think Berlusconi adopted a retrospective approach, because Berlusconi's campaign strategy was that of presenting himself as a reassuring man, because he had already governed in the past. He tried to present himself as a moderate. And so he was really appealing to his own electorate in terms, you trusted me in the past, trust me again. And to do so, actually, also from the point of view of the campaign initiative, Berlusconi repeated the same thing. And I think the most symbolic and paradigmatic event is that on the slide. And all Italians know about this, but let me explain to you. On your right, the picture features Berlusconi in 2001, together with Bruno Vespa. Bruno Vespa is a famous anchorman in Italy. And on that occasion, Berlusconi signed the famous contract with the Italians. And this was a great media event. Everybody talked about this for days. And on the opposite side, on your left, you may see another picture that it's very similar. The point is this picture is actually 2018, okay? And he went again to the same talk show. And this is, I think, an indicator of the stability of the Italian political scenario. No? We have still the same anchorman, the same talk show, and so on, and Berlusconi went to sign another contract with Italian. And of course, it is a déjà vu, but it's clear that Berlusconi had a strategy in mind, that of presenting himself again in the same way, because he hoped to reconquer his own voters. This was not entirely successful, but of course it was a possible strategy. As for the Partito Democratico, I think that the retrospective approach is more interesting, in the sense it is less evident from some point of view, but clearer from some other point of view, in the sense that the Partito Democratico carried out a peculiar campaign, because usually a proper retrospective appeal is available just to incumbents, to people that governed before, because you are asking people to evaluate performances. So Partito Democratico was in the right position to make some retrospective appeal from that point of view. However, usually, because I forget to tell you that retrospective and prospective are not exclusive. You can mix both. in a campaign strategy. And usually, you tend to use maybe some prospective appeal, retrospective appeal at the beginning. So you start the campaign by emphasizing your performances, your achievements, and as far as the campaign progresses, you change a bit because you have also to talk about the future. This is the rule. And the interesting point is that Partito Democratico actually focused on the past even at the end of the campaign, more or less. Because, or at least the emphasis was more or less the same. Because the slogan of the Partito Democratico was 100 things done, 100 things to do. You may see a screenshot of the electoral manifesto. It's a page, just a page of the electoral manifesto, just to show you how they presented things done and things to do without any difference. There are two lists. No particular emphasis on some proposal for the future. Even more paradigmatic, this one was the official PD electoral ads, released 2 weeks before the election vote, so in the second part of the campaign. And I cannot show you the video, but let me just say something about the plot. This is a family, and the father doesn't want to vote for the PD, and he says and he repeats, I don't want to vote for the PD, and mother and 2 children are trying to convince him, and they are trying to convince him by listing the achievements of the government. And of course this is a possible strategy, but at the same time is also a bit risky, because if the people are not really very satisfied, talking about the past until the end and not emphasizing enough your future proposal, not to give a special emphasis on a future proposal, is not really so a safe strategy, at least from my point of view. This is my perception. However, it's clear that this was the preferred strategy of the PD in this electoral campaign. Okay, I think I've concluded my time, so let me say that I don't have proper conclusion. I'm just offering you those reflections, and I hope we will have the room to discuss them. But I think the fact that the 2 pairs have something in common is in any case is worth reflecting about it. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So thank you, Donatella, for your contribution.
20 minutes, perfect.
Yeah, perfect time. So we have some time for questions and comments. We can open the floor to anybody who would like to say something.
So do we know how many people read the platform of the political parties? Because you were referring to this page, so I did not read it, and I have nothing to do in my life except to follow Italian politics. And then the second question, don't you think that a crucial aspect of the losing vote for the PD is what I call, against my American colleagues, the incumbent disadvantage? People who are in government, not normally in Europe, they lose elections, no matter what.
Just a few people read the electoral platforms, this is clear. I've shown it just to give you an idea of the conception of the campaign. In any case, the same style was used in most campaign material. This is the platform, but also leaflets were similar. This idea of the list. Even in the electoral ads, the 2, I don't remember the mother or the children, they are reading the list in the smartphone. So this was simply to give you an idea of the fact that they did not emphasize in a special way future proposal, but they put the 2 things exactly the same level, also from really from the aesthetic point of view of the campaign. Incumbent disadvantage, we know this. We know that now one of the, I think the main problem of contemporary leadership is the fact that it's more and more difficult to really to accomplish electoral promises because the expectations are very high, but also resources are limited, and so on and so on. This is one of the reasons why I think this is the great question of democracy today, what we can do to reduce expectation, to convince people that expectation should be reduced because we are no more in the happy time of the economic boom. In any case, there is an incumbent disadvantage, but if it is true that there is an incumbent disadvantage, it is even truer, even actually more serious to take into consideration a campaign entirely based on emphasis on performances is risky.
We have one more question from Jim Newell.
Thank you. I'm not sure whether this is a question or just a couple of comments, really. I suppose, looking at the campaign from abroad, I was struck particularly by the PD's campaign. I was aware that, or at least this was my perception, that actually the PD government had a lot to defend. Economic growth was picking up. The government had been praised for a variety of measures in a number of quarters, including the OECD. I think it had actually done quite a lot to combat poverty, taking measures which I think were introduced in January, which went some way to meeting the Movimento 5 Stelle's demand for a reddito di cittadinanza. And yet it didn't seem to do much to defend its record, and as an incumbent government I would have expected that. I noticed that Paolo Gentiloni actually had very, very good approval ratings. I guess the problem for the PD was that because their party leader was not also the Prime Minister, it was impossible for Gentiloni to transform his personal approval ratings into support for his party. But I wonder why the PD didn't do more. It had so many cards to play, and yet didn't seem particularly willing to use them to good effect. So I suppose my question is what your thoughts might be about that. The second thing is I was struck by the graph showing the emphasis on leaders in programs. And the thought that immediately went through my mind was, of course, something like parties like Casa Pound and Potere al Popolo, I guess, are going to have great emphasis on leaders simply because they're very, very small. So when they're asked to go on television, they're going to ask the leader.
Okay, yeah.
So I suppose, I suppose what I'm saying, I guess, is obvious. If you'd have to control for size of party, I suppose, if you're going to compare them. But I guess because your comparison was what between the Lega and Movimento 5 Stelle.
Yes.
I guess, well, they ended up with quite a different share of the vote. But anyway, thanks very much.
No, thank you very much for this question, because you are offering me some time to talk more about the leadership and exactly about this picture, this graph that is quite interesting, I think, for two reasons. As for PDs, I think this picture is just an indicator, of course, but it shows one of the main features of this campaign, because it's interesting to see that Renzi was much less visible than before. If we compare, for instance, the campaign at the European election, Renzi was absolutely the leading actor. He really spoke for the party, even if it was a European election, not a national election. And I don't know really, I'm just basing on my impression, because at that time I haven't seen actually the data of the Osservatorio di Pavia, but I really remember this feeling that Renzi at that point was the protagonist. Instead, this time, probably Renzi decided, I don't want to say to stay on the backside, but in any case, to give some room also to other people in the party. At least this is what the numbers show. But just to refer to what you said, there was a certain ambiguity about the leadership, exactly because there was this difference between the party leader and a prime minister, and it was not entirely clear who could be the next prime minister in case of a victory of the PDs, or in any case a situation of a possible future coalition. So in some ways I think the leadership was the message referred to the leadership was more ambiguous than in the past. By contrast, Salvini was not sure to be the leader of the center-right coalition, but he was able actually to present himself in a very assertive way, just to make the difference between two different situations. The situation of the Northern League, I think, is completely clear. What I wanted to stress is the fact that the five-star movement is really different from that point of view, because there is a distributed leadership and there is a division of labor, because Di Maio has this more institutional image, but in the five-star movement there are also other people that speak for the party in a different way, like Alessandro Di Battista, and in any case there is still the founder that is there, okay, has not disappeared. Beppe Grillo is clearly important, and when Beppe Grillo speaks, everybody listens to him. So there is a more distributed leadership, while the Northern League is, I don't want to say a personal party, because the history of the Northern League is different, but in any case, Salvini is clearly the spokesperson.
Okay, thank you again, Donatella. I think we can move to the next presentation by Lorenzo De Sio, who is professor of political science from the Lewis University in Rome. He will be speaking about the issues, the strategic use of issues in this electoral campaign.
So thank you very much. I'm going to speak today in a perspective of what I call issue competition. That is to say, the idea here, I'm going to show you some data that comes from a comparative project that we started last year, which is dedicated to comparing issue competition in different, so far, European countries. What's the idea here? The basic idea is that we assume that we live in a more and more de-ideologized context, where very frequently parties end up combining heterogeneous issues across ideological boundaries. Just think as an example, the Front National in France, that combines left-wing position on social protection and welfare with right-wing positions against immigrants. This is becoming more and more common in Europe. As a result, what we're doing here is that I developed a theoretical framework about that. The idea is that in this de-ideologized context, parties end up selectively picking different issues that offer a potential electoral return. And we elaborated a numerical index, you're going to see some data about that allows to identify those optimal issues. That is to say, those issues that allow you to keep your party united, to appeal to a broader electorate, and to enjoy high credibility. By the way, just to borrow Donatella's terminology, precisely those issues that allow you to reconcile a maintenance campaign with a conquest campaign. And you're going to see later what I'm talking about. And we are doing a 6-country comparative project. We collected data about those 6 countries, which is made of pre-electoral web survey data for making an inventory of the issue resources for each party, each issue opportunities. And in the campaign, we then proceeded to Twitter monitoring and Twitter coding to see if parties really do a strategic behavior by emphasizing the highly strategic issues. What are the general questions of the project and specific questions about Italy? General questions. First of all, positional versus valence issue resources. This is a distinction that we have in the literature. Basically, the idea is that in politics, you have something that is conflictual, might be gay marriages, abortion, flat tax, and you have something which is usually not conflictual. For example, waste management. You want the city to be clean. I cannot translate to English the famous, I don't know if it was Deng Xiaoping, it doesn't matter whether the cat is black or white, it matters whether it catches mice. Now, there's a lot of valence politics into real politics. So the idea here is that who is using more positional, more conflictual resources or more valence resources? Usually, governing parties, mainstream parties, tend to rely on their government experience and government reputation. They usually point on valence issues, while small, aggressive, conflictual niche parties tend to rely on conflict mobilization strategies. We're going to see whether this applies. Second point, what we're interested in is whether nowadays these party constituencies are ideologically consistent or not anymore. The case of the Front National is a case where you start to have mixed platforms, or for example, Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, who is strongly progressive on civil rights, and strongly conservative against Islam. So these are examples. We're going to see whether this applies to Italy too. Now, specific questions about Italy. Our expectations were that the Five-Star Movement historically has had more reputation on some valence issues, such as reducing costs of politics, fighting corruption. We're going to see whether these are the issues or other issues now. The Northern League has moved from a regional to a national radical right-wing party, as Donatella has emphasized. Finally, the PD. I'm going to say something more about the PD, because the PD had strategic problems in this case. For example, the positional versus valence strategy. On the one hand, this is a mainstream, long-time governing party, which you expect to emphasize valence issues. But at the same time, there's this problem of leadership. In a way, you would know that a success of the PD would not have meant Paolo Gentiloni to be reappointed. But a huge success of the PD might have led Matteo Renzi in some governing positions. So in a way, the PD was fought in between choosing, trying to claim back the government legacy, but at the same time, trying to promote something new, something different. And we've got some unexpected results in this regard. Finally, an interesting point about the strategy of the PD, because what we knew in past years before this election is that Matteo Renzi has made some important moves towards the center. For example, he approved a job market reform, which was more right-wing than previously. So in a way, Matteo Renzi has had a sophisticated strategy of moving a bit right-wing on economic issues, but left-wing on cultural issues, on civil rights, on Europe. So in a way, we're going to see whether these have shown a bit in the data. Now, some data first. Positional versus valence issues. This is an example from Germany, just to show you what we're talking about. This is on the rose side, La Via en Rose. These are parties that talk about problem solving. Look, we are better problem solver, we are more competent, we are more credible, we are long-time mainstream parties, so we're talking about how to handle the economy. In Germany, this is an example from Germany, you see that the long-time governing parties, such as the Union, the Liberals, and the Social Democrats, are clearly on the problem-solving side. While new parties, such as Alternative für Deutschland and even the Greens, of course, are much more on the conflict mobilization side. Some data about Italy. Let's start from Forza Italia. These are the top 10 issue resources for this party. Now, this, in a way, corresponds to a classic governing parties. Most resources for Forza Italia are valence issues. Forza Italia is considered the most credible for ensuring economic growth. The problem is that, of course, this is a party in crisis, and you see that for most of these are the best issues for this party. On most of these, Forza Italia is not the top party. He's the top credible party only for economic growth, but on all other issues, it's either second most credible or third most credible, sorry. So in a way, this shows on one side the crisis of Forza Italia, but at the same time, it's in line with the profile of a governing party. So there is comparing the issue yield values, there's a prevalence of problem solving. Twitter communication, in a way, did not completely reflect this share, because we see that Forza Italia emphasized more positional issues than valence issues. So on one hand, you might say that it was not a fully strategic campaign. In terms of ideology, you see that for positional issues, they are mostly conservative. You have to limit the number of refugees, which is conservative. No easier citizenship for immigrants' children. But at the same time, we have what we classified, with all the limitation, as a progressive goal. That is to say, increase economic support to families with children. So you see the limitations of ideology. It's not easy to fit. Even Forza Italia has already some mixed ideological profile. Now, a lot of valence for Forza Italia compared with the Lega. The Lega is clearly a conflict mobilization party. You see, most of their core issues are conflictual issues. To limit refugees, cut welfare for immigrants, no easier citizenship for immigrants. You see that the top three issues for the League are clearly related to immigration. Decriminalize excess of self-defense, leave the euro. By the way, just to tell you the strength of the issue reputation of the League, on all these 10 issues, the League is considered the most credible. This is the leader of the center-right. Look at limit the number of refugees. By the way, in this poll, the voting intention for the League was 12% of the whole sample, which translated to 14%, 15% of valid votes. Compared to this 12%, 42% of Italians consider the League credible for limiting the number of refugees. And by the way, I'm sorry for this datum, but you see that 80% of Italians agree that the number of refugees should be limited. So in a way, you see the power of the issue of this issue resource. This is an issue that allows the League to establish a dialogue with 42% of Italians that might be potential voters. So the League clearly qualifies as a conflictual party, and they had a very strategic Twitter communication. 83% of their communication was dedicated to positional conflictual issues. They were very strategic. In terms of ideology, they are mostly conservative, but they have one, I'd say, progressive economic issues, which is to support a reduction of pension age. It was perhaps one of the reasons why they got votes, even if, coming from leftist parties. Now let's come to the two paradoxes here. This is the five-star movement. You see that the five-star movement has a strong prevalence. This is a challenger party. It's got such a strong prevalence of valence issues. It's considered credible by 41% of Italians for cutting the costs of politics. Of course, that's their flagship issues. But also to renew Italian politics, fight corruption, but even, interesting, to reduce poverty, fight pollution, fight unemployment. Typical issues of governing parties with an economic reputation. Still, even here, the five-star movement is the party with top credibility, with top yield on most of these issues. And finally, it's interesting to note that on all positional issues, the five-star movement is on left-wing position. And it's not ideologically mixed, although I have to mention that just below the top 10 issues, there comes immigration issues, where the five-star movement has a right wing, has a conservative position. As a result, it's ideologically mixed when you take immigration into account. And finally, oh, by the way, they were very strategic in their campaign because 87% of their tweets were dedicated to valence issues. And finally, the paradox of the PD, which as a long-term governing party has most of their issue resources concentrated in positional issues. It's it looks like a conflict mobilization party. It's the party of people pro-EU. It's the party of people pro-immigrants. There is the vaccination issue, which was an issue during the campaign. They are for civil unions against the flat tax, for the end-of-life legislation that they just passed, and their valence issue is ensure economic growth, but they are only ranking third in terms of credibility of this. And finally, what is very interesting is that we have some kind of ideological challenge, which in a way corresponds, we're going to see later, that to the strategy of the PD. That is to say, they are very progressive on cultural issues, but they have this conservative position in that among their top lead issues, there is the promotion of economic globalization. We're going to see later what's the importance of this issue. And finally, their strategy on Twitter was mostly positional, it's really 50-50, but there was a predominance of positional issues, which clearly is not in line with the profile of a governing party that wants to claim the legacy of their government experience. As a result, when you compare Italy with Germany, you see that PD curiously fits as a conflict mobilization party. This is one of the paradoxes of this election. Now, very quickly, something more about the strategy of the PD. Donatella said, I don't see any strategy. I would say I see a strategy, perhaps not a winning strategy, because it didn't go very well. But let's try to see whether we really had a confirmation for the expectation of a differentiation between economic and cultural issues that was, in a way, the idea of Renzi's strategy. I would say Renzi, from the beginning, had the idea of conquering votes in the center, right? That's why, in a way, he did the Jobs Act, the school reform. But at the same time, following, for those of you that remember the old movie, he knew that he had to say something left, di qualcosa di sinistra, and he did that on civil rights, end of life, legislation, civil unions for gay people. So let's see whether there has been really a shift in the PD constituency. And the analysis that I'm showing right here is simply to compare the issue preferences of voters that have quitted the PD, so they were part of the old PD of Pierluigi Bersani, the old social democratic PD, compared to newcomers. Because I can tell you that there were newcomers to the PD, people that were attracted to this new PD. So in a way, this is a way to show the difference between the old and the new PD. Very quickly, EU issues. So leave the EU, which means that on the left you are more pro-European, and you see that new voters, on average, tend to be more pro-European than all PD voters. So you could say that on EU issues, the new PD is more pro-Europe. On immigration, you see that, again, on the three issues related to immigration, you clearly see that there is a difference with new voters of the PD being more favorable to immigration, by the way, in a country that is 80% for limiting refugees. So this may be one of the reasons why you got a position in an area that is not much populated. On civil rights, you don't see a lot of difference. If any, you see that on the drug legalization issues, the new voters tend to be more conservative than old voters. And finally, the point here is about the economy. And on the economy, what you do see is that on all economic issues, new voters of the PD tend to be more conservative than old voters. For example, companies should be more free to hire and fire. You see that new voters are almost split 50-50, which is, of course, not in line with old voters that were classic legacy of a social democratic party. Finally, interestingly enough, promote economic globalization. You see that new PD voters are in a slight majority for promoting economic globalization, while all PD voters were, of course, in a slight majority for limiting economic globalization. And this is an important issue because I'll show you later that this is the issue, the only issue that clearly puts on different sides the winners and the losers on the election. And I conclude by just giving you some data about the new issue space. How do you see different parties on those different issues? This is interesting to see, on the one hand, whether public opinion is polarized or not, and implications for possible governments, because the PD claims that they are too far from the Five Star Movement. They would rather govern with Forza Italia. Let's see what happens here. On the EU, you have some kind of differentiation. You see, this is the orange is the PD, green is the League, Forza Italia, Five Star Movement, and the gray is the sample average, the Italian population. You see that there is some differentiation that is due to the PD and the League, but you don't have a coalition of Europeanists versus sovereignists, because the Five Star Movement is even slightly more pro-Europe than Forza Italia in terms of their voters. So you don't have a coalition of Europeanists with PD and Forza Italia against. The Five Star Movement is not really a Eurosceptic party, at least in terms of their voters. Migration, you still have a differentiation due mostly to the PD, because the PD is the most radical pro-immigration party, while other parties tend to relatively cluster together. Here the Five Star Movement is closer to the Northern League, but Forza Italia is even more close. On civil rights, you have a lower level of differentiation, and the Five Star Movement is very close to the median voter. Also, with Forza Italia is also closer to the median voter. And finally, on the economy, this is interesting, because on the economy you have a lower level of differentiation. Here is the only issue domain where the Five Star Movement is consistently on the left. By the way, general Italian public opinion is mostly on leftist position, like in most European countries. On these kind of issues, there is a prevalence of traditional left-wing position. The Five Star Movement has a consistently left-wing positions, while the PD, that's interesting, on several of these issues has the rightmost position. And finally, globalization, as you see, is the single issue that puts the winners of this election, that is to say, the Five Star Movement and the League, on the contrary side, with Forza Italia and the PD on the pro side. The idea here, we got also some ecological data that showed that there came out a desire of protection from the adverse consequences of these transformation processes. So in a way, our interpretation is that it should not be surprising that this issue provided the differentiation between the winners and the losers. Thanks.
Thank you, Lorenzo, for this very interesting analysis. The Five Star Movement is really the median party, according to your data, the data you showed us. I guess there are questions on these or comments, so please, Pasquale.
Well, there are a lot of interesting data, so I should have more time to digest them. But it seems to me that the profile you showed of the PD is not only, to use a vulgar term and not a jargon term like you, he's more for conflictual position than for consensual position, but not only conflictual, but also, I would say, transformative. And I tend to believe, that's my intuition, and so is a question, that this is the reason why the PD lost votes. Because in a country like Italy, to try to modify the status quo, notably remembering what Professor Dalimonte taught me, that there are no Pareto superior reform. Whatever reform makes some people unhappy. There is no way to have a Pareto superior new status quo. So if you change things, you will be punished, especially in a country which doesn't like, but also Schröder was punished because of the Hartz-Gesetze. So it's not typically Italian. We will see if Emmanuel Macron will survive this radical transformation of the French society. That's for the next few years. But so it seems to me that in a country like Italy, people who voted for the PD were both risk-prone, and to be risk-prone, you have to be relatively well-off and not fragile. Because if you are fragile, you are risk-averse. And this five-star movement seems the best instantiation of this immobile part of the population which is fragile and risk-averse. So they don't say anything which is not consensual. Okay, who is against cleaning the city? Well, where they are in charge, the clean is very dirty, but that's a different point. So, but nobody is against abolishing pollution, abolishing corruption, reducing the spending of politics, which is nothing compared with the public debt, is 0.00 some stuff. Okay, so that's a fantastic picture of the Italian political situation and election. I commented as I did. What do you think about my commentary?
Is there any other question?
I found very interesting and persuasive your analysis about the issues and issue mobility of new parties especially. Very informative, the analysis of the position on different issues. And I'm interested also in knowing what kind of data you are using. Are they data of survey 2008, post-electoral? 2018, sorry. Pre-electoral, okay. There is one point that on which I have some doubt. That is your stress on the distinction between positional and balance. Because we can read again, probably, your, yeah. And I guess that we could say this is a balance or a positional according with the rhetorical phrasing of the same concept. For instance, citizens safer from crime in the past was told spend more on the police, or reinforce the education system. Could have said we could have said spend more on education or spend more on health, and would have become a positional issue. And you can say the same thing about other methods that you for sure classify as a valence. For instance, what struck me more was reduce polluting. Actually, there is no method like regulation on pollution that is considered a positional and divisive issue. So, how can we discriminate really between valence and positional? It seems to me that you are just saying they are good enough in presenting very divisive and conflictual and controversial issues like they were valence issue, while the Democratic Party are not so good in doing the same job. But analytically, I cannot really understand where is the point and how you really can distinguish. Okay, so obviously this is the point. I a little bit disagree on the stress you put on this specific question. Okay.
Like Salvatore, I buy the distinction between valence position and position issues. My question is, what's the rationale for the government to play the valence issues rather than the position issues? It's not clear because, I mean, you may have achieved any result which then you can exploit in terms of the good, the performance of the government, but you also can exploit the goal you have achieved. And then I have a curiosity, who are the new PD voters? Because
And how many they are?
Because you contrast them with the 2008 PD voters, the 2013 PD voters, but they lost a few million votes. So I was wondering whom they are.
Okay, Lorenzo, 3 minutes for 3 answers. No, we don't have time. Sorry, Roberto.
Change. People don't like change. Now, it depends on the direction of change. Change is never neutral. Now, Renzi had an extremely high credibility in 2014 for renewing Italian politics. We got a series of panel data by which came out that his credibility for renewing Italian politics went like that throughout the years. Scandals, minor episodes such as the banking scandals, just give you the idea that who claimed to be a newcomer, in reality was the expression of opaque local elites. These might have been playing out. In a way, what the data show is that nowadays, even on valence issues, because valence issues are apparently neutral, but they are clearly differentiated in terms of credibility. And by the way, Paolo has longly studied economic voting. Economic voting, and this is partly also an answer to Salvatore, there are valence issues. Economic voting is a typical example. Is the economy going better or going worse? Of course, any issue can be framed in positional or valence terms, but what we asked even for other countries, what we asked local experts in order to classify issues as valence or positional is in terms of the level of conceptualization that is prevalent in the public debate among ordinary voters. Yeah, I mean, for us scholars, it's clear that waste management is a positional issue. Do you do waste disposal? It's positional. But for ordinary people, a lot of issues are just valence issues. I mean, these guys are not able to fill the holes in the streets. That's a valence issue. That guy's better. So what we have, but the point is that during the campaign, there happens a conflict over framing. And usually there are winners and losers. When Eisenhower won against the very strong Democratic Party in 1952, he was able to convince the country that the problem was a valence problem for Korea, corruption, and communism. The Democrats fought hard for the whole campaign to try to bring him back to positional issues. Do you mean more troops, less troops? He won that framing war. So the fact that some issues, we decide, I cannot reply, let me finish. The fact that we decided to quote some of them because we assumed our responsibility to classify these issues as if the prevalent framing in this country was a valence framing. Finally, the point from Paolo Bellucci, what's the rationale for governments? Why should they only focus on valence issues? That's a very good point. Why should this happen? Now, let me tell you that the analysis that we make here is in fact an analysis about the available resources. Now, in principle, even governing parties have available positional resources, but in general, they tend to have a larger number of available valence resources because they benefit from a natural reputation for government. So our expectation is that in general, and this is confirmed by what we did on the 6 countries, in most of the 6 countries, traditionally governing parties tend to have more valence resources available than smaller parties. So that was our expectation for the PD and for Forza Italia. This was confirmed for Forza Italia. But for the PD, in a way, what comes out, and it comes out even from the transformation that Pasquale suggested, that is to say, Renzi did a lot of effort to provide a new PD, but the idea is that the new PD became more qualified on positional issues, the party of Europe, the party of civil rights, the party of modernization, rather than claiming the legacy of government experience. So this is why I think this is my suggested explanation for the fact that the PD had available in the end more positional resources than valence resources. And just a point on who new voters are, it's easier to tell who are the voters that left. Now, very quickly, we published an analysis about class voting, and what we see that the PD used to be a mostly interclass party in 2013, while in 2008, it has lost in all classes except in the upper middle class. So basically, and this is an interesting analysis, just 10 seconds. It's not elites in terms of education, like traditional left-wing party, but it's an elite in terms of standards of living. That is to say, those that are left in the PD constituencies are people that tend to be better off, so they're still optimistic about transformations.
Okay, thank you. Thank you again. It's time to go ahead. So we have the last presentation of this session by Filippo Tronconi on the five-star movement. And so,
thank you, first of all, Alessandro, Roberto, and Nicolò for inviting me and for organizing this. I will focus my presentation on one of the parties, on the five-star movement, which is, in a sense, it's not the big novelty. It was already novel. It was already there in 2013, but still is something that raises many curiosities and much interest from the observers, especially outside Italy, because it's kind of unrecognized object. It's still a party that needs to be understood in a sense. And I think that this is a good occasion. 2018 elections are a good occasion to see where it stands, what kind of political animal is the five-star movement. Yeah, because it's an anti-establishment party, it's a post-ideological party, as I will argue in this presentation, but it's going towards governments, going very quickly and very consistently towards government. So that raises a number of problems, as it always happens to populist anti-establishment parties who try to become part of the establishment of the highest level, so in government. Sometimes especially on international newspapers, we read that the five-star movement is assimilated to a radical right populist party like the Front National in France, because it's Eurosceptic, because it's anti-immigrant, it's said to be anti-immigrant. Sometimes, on the contrary, we read that the five-star movement is the Italian version of Podemos, or maybe Podemos is the Italian version of the five-star movement, because it's an anti-austerity party. And so, well, my impression, and I'll try to show you in the next few minutes, that it's none of them. I prefer to think of the five-star movement as a post-ideological anti-establishment party, and both elements, post-ideological and anti-establishment, are important, are relevant, and the combination of the two give the better picture, I think, of this party. And also I say that the five-star movement is not really repositioning in 2018. It's the positioning of the five-star movement in 2018 is rather consistent with the history, with the short history of this party. We see a repositioning relative to the European Union, and I can see a repositioning in terms of style of communication, and already starting from the differences between Beppe Grillo, who was the front man in 2013, and Luigi Di Maio, who was the front man in 2018. They have a different self-presentation, they have different gestures, they have different ways of communicating to the public. So, but it's more different in style of communication, which is of course relevant. I'm not saying that it's not relevant, than repositioning in terms of policy issues, in terms of substantial points. Let's see, if we start trying to identify the positioning of the five-star movement with the typical question of our service, which is how do you position yourself on this left-right dimension? Where would you put yourself? There's a scale from 0 to 10. 0 is extreme left, 10 is extreme right. Where do you position yourself? And then you can get a picture, a first picture of where a party is located on this dimension. Well, if you do this exercise for the five-star movement, you get no results, actually. You have an impression of a centrist party. These are data from the survey in 2016, so it's not the 2018. I didn't have a chance to look closely to the 2018 data yet, but this is 2016, but this is consistent with 2013, with 2014, so this is a consistent picture. The five-star movement is a centrist party, but it's a centrist party because it mixes people from left and people from right. So you have always the broader standard deviation, so the broader dispersion of people along this dimension, left and right. And also look at that 27% of people who refuses to locate themselves on this dimension, who say, I'm not right and leftist, I don't think right and left have any meaning in today's politics. If you see the difference, in Forza Italia only 1.1% refuse to locate on this dimension, 2.3% in the Partito Democratico, 27% in the five-star movement. So we have to go to issues, as Lorenzo was saying. If you ask people, are you leftist, rightist, you go nowhere in the case of the five-star movement. You have to go to issues. And that's what I'm trying to do. On economic issues, on, say, cultural issues, which I use the immigration proxy to refer to more broadly to cultural issues, and then we'll see on the anti-establishment issues. Economic position, if you read the 2018 manifesto of the five-star movement, the electoral manifesto, you find a lot of leftist stances, like, say, we already mentioned the universal basic income, which is not a universal basic income technically, but they sold it as a universal basic income. Higher pensions, lower retirement age, expanding funds for the national health system, for public school, no funding for private school, which is, from time to time, this is a hot topic in Italian politics. So if the state has to pay money for private, which means Catholic, mostly Catholic schools. But also, you find issues, you find the electoral program platform raising issues that appeal to traditional rightist constituencies of shopkeepers, small entrepreneurs, like less taxes for all, which, by the way, this is exactly the phrasing of the 2018 manifesto, and we remember Berlusconi in 2001 with these big posters on the streets claiming that he would bring less taxes for all. And restructuring and reduced power for the Equitalia, for the National Revenue Agency, which is also something that they already raised in 2013, and which is something that appeals to, especially to liberal professional, to shopkeepers, to small entrepreneurs. So less strength on tax evasion. So this is the message, basically. And then if we look at voters, again, these are surveys. These are 3 surveys in 3 points in time, but you get the same picture. You see that, as Lorenzo was already telling, this is consistent with Lorenzo's pictures, the five-star movement is always the median position between Forza Italia and the PD, so the 2 mainstream leftist and rightist parties, and it's always very close to the median Italian voter. Immigration, again, there are some catchphrases that Di Maio and Grillo sent out from time to time, and people has a perception of the five-star movement as an anti-immigrant party. Well, okay, if there is this perception, it's because they want to give this perception, of course. But if you look at their manifesto, if you take seriously their political platform, their official political platform, you see a mix. You don't see such a clear picture. You see a mix. The title of the section devoted to immigration is Zero Landing of Immigrants. Italy is not the refugee camp of Europe, so it's kind of a very tough expression that you would expect also from Salvini or from some other rightist leader. But then, if you look at the points, the bullet points in the program, the platform, you see that you need to establish safe and legal channels of access to Europe. You need a revision of the Dublin regulation so you have to cooperate with Europe to distribute immigrants, you have to guarantee a fast decision of the status of refugees to immigrants, and you have to stop selling weapons to countries engaging in wars. So it's a more nuanced position. It's not, these are points that you don't expect from Salvini. You see, zero lending you expect from Salvini, then there are some more accommodative strategies. I mean, of course, into a framework where 80% of people are against refugees, and so I see that the main focus is on zero lending, and the communication is based on the zero lending position. But then also, from the point of view of the voters, you see that the position of the five-star movement voters on immigration is is in the middle between Forza Italia and the Partito Democratico, and it's very close. It's always very close to the median Italian voter. European Union, here you have, as I was saying, here you have a clear repositioning. I don't have survey data on this actually, but you see that was the position of the 2014, so European elections. They wanted to go out of the euro. This was an event in December 2014, but they made a lot of events like this to collect signatures for a referendum to exit the euro. And then in 2017, the big step of repositioning was, you see, how to say this? Here. The first picture is people voting online, five-star movement supporters voting online to join the liberal Euro group in Brussels, which is the most Euro-enthusiastic group. Now they are part of the Farage group, or the European Freedom and Direct Democracy group, which is the most Eurosceptic. They try to join the most Euro-enthusiast group, and people of the five-star movement say yes, but then in the end, the liberal group said they didn't accept the five-star movement. And you see also how they voted in the European Parliament. You see that the less agreement, the lesser agreement that they have is with exactly with the UK Independence Party. So their group, I mean, while the ALDE group, so the liberal, the group they wanted to join, 50% of the times they voted with the liberals, and 74% of the time, or 72% of the time, they voted with the Greens, with the left, with the alternative left group in Europe. So here you have a clear repositioning of the party. And then we got final, say, issue, the final section. So it's what they think about the anti-establishment issue, generally speaking, which is in first place anti-party, the anti-party position. And they're very clear on this. I was trying to show that they're kind of mixing appeals on the economic and also, to some extent, on the immigration issue. They are very clear and very tough on the representation, the establishment, political parties. Here are some phrases taken from the blog of Beppe Grillo, Through Time. So Parliament does not represent citizens any longer. They cannot vote for candidates, but only for party symbols. Parties have replaced popular will and avoid its control and judgment. Party occupied the state. They have sold it off, and etc., etc. I'm not going to read everything, but this is the rhetoric that you expect from an anti-establishment party. And Five-Star Movement is very clear on this. Not only parties, of course, but also trade unionists, European Union bureaucrats or national bureaucrats, and journalists and lobbyists and banks. Banks is also on the target, is a very clear target of the Five-Star Movement. This statement is also taken from the blog of Beppe Grillo. International finance is fighting its war for predominance, for the draining out of democracies and the states. It's a superorganism that takes no notice of anyone, that can make use of the media, the politician, waiters, and the government themselves. The Third World War is not fought on the battlefield of bombs, but it's on the editor office of newspapers, and so on and so forth. So this is very clear. I could present hundreds of these statements from the blog, from public interviews, I mean, this is the main line of communication. And all the points that I was very briefly mentioning before, on economy, on the health system, on justice, on immigration, everything, all the time. If you read the platform, there is on each one of these points, there was the presence of, we want transparency, we want to fight corruption in all of these fields. So it's not only the issue of anti-establishment, the issue of anti-establishment is kind of frame that applies to all substantial points, to all substantial issues. And this is voters' position on this anti-party positioning. And you see here very clearly, the five-star movement is not median, is not close to the median Italian voter, is not in the middle between Forza Italia and the Partito Democratico. The five-star movement is very extreme on this point. They are clearly the owners of this issue of anti-establishment on all the various components of this anti-establishment issue. So you have three declinations, so to say, of what people think about parties, and on all these declinations, the picture is very clear and is very consistent through time. What are my conclusions from this very quick tour on the five-star movement issue? The five-star movement is an anti-establishment party. There is a strategy behind this positioning. They want to own this issue, which is very popular, which is very topical in Italian politics, not only in Italian politics. They want, on the other hand, to mix their position on purpose on other issues, because they want to keep the largest possible constituency, and they don't want to split these constituencies on economic issues and also and even on immigrant issues or on other issues. So they do this on purpose. They mix up positions on many substantial issues because their main focus and the place where they get most of their votes is saying that parties are all equal, that the establishment is all the establishment is responsible for the ruins of Italy and so on, and that they are different from all the other parties, candidates, leaders, and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you, Filippo. I know that the topic of the five-star movement is very popular, and I guess maybe we can have some questions from our students, because I'm sure they are very interested in this kind of new phenomenon. Some of them have studied actually the five-star movement deeply, or they have made research on that. So I would like to open the floor to everybody, of course, but if there is a question from our students, is more than welcome. Yes, Geffen, please.
So, from what I understand, the five-star movement didn't get enough votes to govern alone, but because they're an anti-establishment party, how would they form a coalition with a established or pro-establishment party in order to form a government? And in addition, if they did decide to form a coalition and govern, how would that affect their voting population? Would they lose popularity?
A very timely question. Is there any other question or comment?
Well, I have a similar question, indeed. So first, I'm wondering if post-ideological movement is not a chic way to say mentally confused. Because listening at you and looking at the reality, you cannot preach in a society which is economically in trouble that you will reduce taxes and establish universal basic income. You have to be relatively stupid to believe that. So, well, it's true, by the way, that each three people in Italy believes that, but now the question is, one strategy is the rhetoric to get in power. But once you are in power, as she said, now you have to govern. And now I'm looking with great interest and pleasure to what they are going to do. I'm worried because of Italians may pay a high price, but I live abroad. But how do you answer the question of the student? I'm just repeating somehow.
Yes, they have a problem, clearly, and we see that they adopted a strategy to maximize votes. They were quite successful at this. Now they have to figure out a strategy to stay in parliament as the bigger party, so to lead negotiations to form a government and eventually to govern somehow. And we're seeing in these days that we're seeing that it's not easy for anti-establishment party to join coalitions, and especially to join coalitions with establishment parties, so with Berlusconi, with mainstream parties. It would be easier to join a coalition with another anti-establishment party as the Lega Nord, but the Lega Nord has problems to leave Berlusconi aside, as we see very recently. So I don't have a crystal ball. I don't want to say how this will end up, because I don't know, but just register that they have a problem which is common to all anti-establishment parties, crossing the threshold of relevance, crossing the threshold of government. Saying that they are having a problem is not saying that they are going to fail, that they are going to disappear 6 months after being in government. Because we have already experiences of populist parties being in government. We had the Lega Nord and also Forza Italia, which was an anti-establishment party in 1994. And they did not disappear. They had problems, highs and lows, but they did not disappear. We have the Swedish People's Party being in government through the 90s. I mean, we have some examples of populist. How do populist parties do in power? There's a very nice book by Duncan MacDonald and Daniele Albertazzi, which is called Populists in Power, and they analyze exactly these 3 cases of the Swiss People Party, Lega Nord and Forza Italia in government. What they did was focusing on their core issues and bringing something to their voters in terms of the core business, so which was for the Lega Nord some federalist arrangement in the north, was some law and order laws, something like this, or the People's Party in Switzerland on immigration, on limitations on immigration. So, and voters understand that one thing is the electoral campaign, and this also tries to answer to Professor Pasquino's question, and people know that doing everything that they promise is impossible, but still, they see, let's see what they are going to do in government. Let's see to what extent they are going to fulfill their promises. And if they fulfill partially, and if they're able to frame these partial successes as big successes in the next electoral campaign, it's not impossible that they continue to attract support. So, yes, they're having troubles. They're going to have troubles. Nonetheless, it's not impossible for populist parties to be successful, electorally successful in government, in my opinion.
I'm sure that we will continue to speak about the five-star movement in the next sessions devoted to the election results. We are a little late on the schedule, so we will have a shorter break, and we will restart again for the second session at 11:30.